So you've received your email with the design and you need to print that out. And what I would suggest is to print it onto the paper side of a piece of freezer paper. So freezer paper has the wax side and then the paper side. And these come in 8.5 by 11 sheets. I have them on my website. So they just slip through the printer, just to inkjet, not laser. They slip through real easily. And what that does is it will stick them together. So they're not going to separate, move around, and it stabilizes the fabric. So it makes it much easier to trace on. And then all you need is a light box and your pen of your choosing. I'm using the Friction Pilot pen that disappears with the heat of an iron. I kind of do a little sketchy line, but see how I'm turning it, and the fabric and the pattern are just stuck together, which is really, really nice. And then these kind of pens disappear with the heat of an iron. So if I happen to draw something in the wrong place, that's all right. I can just press it when I'm all done and it'll disappear. So see how fast and easy that was? So that's what I would recommend for tracing. So here's the little bunny done in different colors. And I used Cosmo flosses on that. I found some really pretty ones. And I'll list all those on the newsletter that goes out with the monthly One Stitch at a Time Club. There's a few stitches I'll go over with you. One of them is the back stitch, which is what I'm using for his whiskers. So you're going to start at one end, wherever the end of your stitching is going to be, and there will be a line drawn on there on your pattern, but I'm free motioning here. So we're going to take about 1/8 of an inch and then another 1/8 of an inch. And now I'm going to go back in that same hole that I just came up from and go past where the thread came up about 1/8 of an inch. So you move forward and then you go back. So it's a back stitch. So back in that same hole right here. And we'll do one more. So you can see where that stitch goes. And that is a back stitch. Now his whiskers are all done. So the other stitch I want to show you is a lazy daisy, which are what these little blooms are made out of. And it's just a nice way to give kind of that poofy look. I can't think of what flower it reminds me of, but it is a nice florally look. So I'm using a 6-strand floss, but I'm only using 2 strands of it. But I wanted to point out, even when you're down to the last 2, you still want to separate them, and that will keep the thread from getting all twisted around. So if you pinch it lightly and then pull one strand and then just bring them back together again. So you always want to pull one strand at a time. Now thread my needle and we'll get going. And to tie a knot, in case you missed it, what I do is I lay the needle and the thread ends. They don't want to stay together for some reason. Cooperate. I kind of lay them just one on top of the other like that. And then I'm going to wrap it around 2 or 3 times, lightly pinch that wrap, and then pull the needle through. And by the end, I have a nice little tiny knot, which is perfect. Okay, so as you can see here, I have some drawings that I'm actually not going to put stitches on. That's because when I draw something, it doesn't hardly ever get stitched the way it's originally drawn. I'm always kind of shifting things around, and that's why I really like to use the Pilot friction pen, because it allows me to kind of go at in my own direction if I want to. So this one I'm going to start up a little higher than it was, but these lazy daisy stitches are kind of like a little loop that come to a point. I moved this one up a little bit. So you're going to pull the needle up at the at the point of that loop at the base and put the needle back down in the same spot, and then come up at the tip of your loop, wrap the thread underneath, pull it through. And now all you have to do is take the needle down on the other side of that loop, and it will hold that loop in place. So this one I'll show you, I'll go right where it's drawn. So I'm coming up, basically this is where the stem would be, and that's the skinny part of the little loop. So I'm going to carry my thread up around, kind of mimic the shape of the loop, go back in that same hole, and I'm going to fudge here. I'm going to take my needle up a little higher because I want my loop to be a little bit bigger than what I had drawn. But the ones that are drawn on your pattern will be like these stitches. There. Okay, so I'll continue on and I'll finish up these little lazy daisy stems, and then we'll move on to the next stitch. So while I still have this darker pink on my needle, I'll show you how to do a French knot. So the French knots are going to be indicated by a dot on your pattern, and there's 3 on each end of these little stems. So I'll come across to this side, and on your pattern there will be a dot right here, and you're going to pull the needle up where the dot is. Place your needle down along the thread and wrap the thread around. I'm going to do 3 times on these. Now I'm still holding on to this because if I let go it's going to come unwrapped. I'm going to put the needle down just a few threads away from where I pulled it up. Slide those wraps down to the fabric. I'm going to pinch that thread between my finger and my thumb, push the needle to the back, and I have a little French knot. So now I'll move up here on your pattern. There will be a dot right there. 1, 2, 3. Put the needle down. Oops, there we go. And we'll do one more here. So the thread comes up right on the dot. You place your needle down, wrap it around 3 times, kind of hold it. What I do is I hold it between my thumb and my finger, just real lightly, so that it doesn't come undone, and put my needle down right next to where I brought it up, slide those wraps down to the fabric, and then pull the needle through. There we go. And one thing I wanted to show you too, which I think I've shown you before, but I tie a knot kind of the same way. I'll wrap it around 2 times, and then I'll slide those wraps down, making a little loop with this hand, and put my finger on that and pull it tight. Now I have a little knot there. And then I repeat, and I do another knot about 1/4 of an inch away from the initial knot, and snip between, and now I'm ready to go and stitch the rest of the French knots. On this month's design, we have a few different kinds of leaves. This is the fishbone, and I'll have to look up the name of that one. Sorry, I can't think of what that one's called, but it's really super simple. And I think when I do this again in my solid dark color, I think it might be pretty heavy to fill all these in, so I might just outline those. Okay, so we're going to do those little stitches over here, and we're going to start, well, initially what I like to do on these, because we're going to have a lot of stitches all ending in the same spot, I put my needle in the base and kind of work it around a little bit, trying to make that hole a little bit bigger there. Now I'm going to take the needle at the top of the leaf. I'm going to go down in that hole that we just created and come up on one side of the initial stitch and right on the line. Now I'm going to go in that same hole and come up on the other side. So it's kind of like a satin stitch at the top because the stitches are right next to each other, but at the base, they're all going into that same hole. So it does give this leaf a little bit of dimension, which is kind of cute. And I'm using a variegated thread here, which is really pretty because each leaf is just a tiny bit different, which I like. There. So that's a really quick way to fill in a leaf if you have a little leaf. The next stitch we're going to work on is the fishbone stitch, and those are these little leaves here. It makes a nice little vein down the center of the leaf because the stitches are going to cross over each other. So what we'll do for those is we're always going to start at the tip of the leaf. And I like to start with a full length of thread because it does use quite a bit of thread and it's easier to do it all in one strand rather than try to knot it off and start again. So since this is a fairly big leaf, if it was a small leaf, I'd pull my first stitch all the way down to the bottom. Since this is a fairly big leaf, I'm going to go down maybe about 1/4 of an inch and bring my needle up on one side of the point where I started, right on the drawn line. And that's the first stitch. Now I'm going to go down just a little past the point of that 1/4 inch and over to the other side of the leaf and then straight up, and I'm going to bring my needle up on the other side, right on the drawn line. So you can see how these are going to cross over each other. Now I'm going to go over to this side, down a little bit more, and then this side down, and then back up on the line. And this actually fills in leaves very nice, and I think it's easier than a stem or a satin stitch for filling in a stitch. Of course, it wouldn't work for some things like noses or where you want it to be really, really smooth. But if you have leaves, this is particularly good. And we just keep going back and forth. And it's just crossing a tiny bit. And as it gets near the end, my stitches are not crossing quite as much because I'm going to have them come to a point. I did something very different this time with some of the flowers. These little light pink flowers. I saw this on Pinterest and I thought it was so cute. They didn't have the French knots in the middle, but I'm making mine with French knots in the middle. Without the French knots, you can see what you're ending up with there. It's just basically thread wrapped around and then held in place in 4 different spots. And it's actually really easy to do. You need 2 pins, straight pins. And since I want this cross stitch to be away from this stem, I'm going to actually make have my pins go in right where those stems are. So here's the stem on this one. So I want my pin to be going towards that. So I'm going to go in a little bit, leave some in the center. Oops. Try that again. There we go. And then I'm going to take a pin and go the opposite direction. Now I'm going to take my thread and needle and I'm going to bring my thread up right next to one of the pins. And then all you have to do is wrap your thread. You don't have to weave it or anything. Just wrap your thread around underneath those pins. Isn't that clever? Okay, so now I filled that in, super easy. I'm going to take the needle back down to secure it. I'm not pulling those threads super tight as I go around because I want it to lay flat. I don't want it to clump up. Now I'm going to take my needle between the two pins right at the edge and then kind of tuck it back on the other side of those strands. And there's one little spot where it's now secured. So now I'm going to come up on this side, right between the pins. And then on the inside, and I kind of push them together a little bit to make it look a little bit more like a petal, if that makes sense. And so you'll do this 4 times, one between each of the pins that hold them in place. And then you can take your pins out. Isn't that cute? Now I'm just going to fill the center in with some French knots, like this one. So my little guy here, I'm doing with just the single color. And I did decide to just outline those leaves because I think it would have just been too heavy if I had filled all those in. And I also did the flowers a little different, these little blooms. So if you didn't feel comfortable doing the pin technique, this is just a stem stitch in a circle. You use really tiny stitches and then a French knot in the center. So a couple things on here to fill in his little bow. I'm just using some running stitches, and a running stitch is the easiest of all, I think. You're just going to do up and down, up and down. And you can take several stitches at a time. You just don't want to pull it tight or it can be gathered, which you don't want to do. And then we'll turn around and we'll come back the other direction. So it's kind of like a little, I'm not really following my drawn lines, am I? It's kind of like a little quilting stitch. And you know what the beauty of not following the lines is that you give a little bit of character to yours, and it's going to be a little bit different than the next one that somebody did. So you can put your own little mark on it by altering the stitches. I don't mind at all. And we'll just do one more there. So now his little bow tie is filled in. The main stitch that we have throughout all of my designs is the stem stitch. So I'll just go over it one more time here. You're always going to start at the end of a line, and usually it's the solid lines that are all stem stitched. And you don't want to start in the middle. You always want to start at one end or the other. So since I have leaves to do up here, I'm going to start this end and work my way up. So you pull your needle up at the top of the line. You're going to go back towards where you just pulled your needle up. You come out about 1/8 of an inch and then back halfway in between. And I always carry my thread on the same side. So if this was a curve, I always carry the thread on the outside of the curve. This is pretty much a straight line, so it wouldn't matter, but I'm just always going to carry it up. Now I'm going to go about 1/8, go back in that same hole, move it a little, there you go, and then pull my thread. And then we just continue doing that. Now I kind of come to this leaf that's overlapping the stem a little bit. So I'm just going to just go right into that leaf there. And now I am glad I have the thread on that side because this is a curve. So we'll just continue that. And then I wanted to show you how I make a nice little point at the tip of my leaf. There's several ways of going around corners, but on a leaf, I like to go to the tip, so that points at the tip. But now I'm going to go just a couple threads past that, and then back in the same hole. Turn my fabric, and I'm going to come back the other way. Again, the thread's on the outside of that curve. And then you can see what that did is it made a nice little point for my leaf. See, right there? It's a nice little point. Okay, so that's the alternative to the fishbone. On the colored one that I did, the one that was filled in, I used a fishbone stitch. Okay, so I'll continue the stem stitches, get those all done, and I think that might be it. Is that it? The different stitches. Maybe I'll show you how I do his eyes too in a little bit. So back on this guy, you can see his eyes. Sorry. It's just a tiny French knot, and I only wrapped it one time around the needle because I didn't want him to have big eyeballs. I just wanted little eyeballs. And then there's just a straight stitch over his eye. And he's looking a little worried, so if you don't want him to look that worried, you can straighten that line out a little bit. It won't look so worried. I'll make this guy look a little less worried. So I'm going to pull the needle up right on the dot to do my French knot. I'm just going to wrap it one time around. Go back really close to that same place I pulled up. Pull my thread down to the base, pinch it. Make sure it's taut, and then pull the needle through. So there's just a little eye. So this one, okay, so this guy, I won't make it quite as worried. Let's see if this works. I might have to take it out, but it's always fun to, but I don't want him to look mad. Let's see. There, he's not quite as worried. So I'll let you decide if you want a worried bunny or a concerned bunny, angry bunny. These want to have the same on both sides. That's the trick. So I think probably about there. Let's see. That eye's a little bit more worried, but I think it works. All right, and there's your woodland hare. I'm going to finish him up, and these ones that I'm doing all in this single color are the ones I'm going to put in my quilt for the quilt contest. Remember, we are having a quilt contest, and last year I gave away tons of really fun, lovely prizes that I collected from Martingale and Moda, and just my own stash of stuff, and just whoever wanted to enter actually won a prize. I don't know if I had that many prizes this year, but I'm going to try. So go ahead and do a little quilt. You need between 9 and 12 images. And you can use your own setting if you want, or I also provide a free quilt pattern that you can download the setting of and use your designs in that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope everybody's well out there. Stay safe. I'm so glad we have handwork to keep us busy while we're home. Take care.